comply with that instruction, and failure to do so may result in the other being prosecuted and or having some action taken against them. So that pretty much wraps up the duties. We've looked at the duties of a PCBU, where they must ensure, so far as is reasonably practicable, the health safety of workers and others at that place of work. We've looked at the duties of officers and their due diligence requirements, which is a positive duty. We've also looked at the duties of a worker and, of course, others, being customers or visitors to that place of work. Let's look at consultation. The principles of consultation remain the same under this new legislation. However, the way we consult has changed. Under the previous legislation, we would look at the employer consulting with the employee. This has changed to include a PCBU consulting with workers at that workplace. Workers could be contractors, subcontractors, labour hire staff, and even volunteers. As a result, the PCBU has a duty to consult with all workers at that place of work. Something new that's been introduced to the legislation is the PCBU must consult with other duty holders within that workplace. So we may have a strata titled managed industrial area where they share a common driveway or entry and exit, and consequently plant or equipment might be used within that area. As a result, it would not be unreasonable that the PCBU using that plant or equipment within that common driveway area to consult with the other PCBUs to ensure that the activities of that PCBU did not present a concern for the health and safety of the other PCBUs in that strata titled managed area. The other thing to take into consideration are the 3 C's: consult, cooperate and coordinate. This might be common to a large shopping complex where we have multiple retailers or PCBUs within that complex. It may also be a construction site where we have multiple PCBUs again in that construction site. Each PCBU needs to know what the other PCBU is doing and whether they will cause harm to that PCBU. This is where the legislation provides for consultation between those parties. So, why do you consult? The purpose of consultation is quite beneficial to the PCBU. Having appropriate consultation mechanisms in place and consulting with my workers provides greater benefits, as it provides for things like ownership, where the workers having active participation in the consultation and or the management of the risks at that workplace would subsequently have ownership and would be far more cooperative in their approach. What are some of the things we'd need to consult about? We need to consult about the arrangements for consultation themselves. So what sort of consultative arrangements would we put in place at that workplace? Other things to consider are the risk management activities within the workplace, the introduction of new plant or equipment. Therefore, the workers must be involved in the consultative arrangements so that we can identify and eliminate and or control the hazards associated with those risks. So when should the PCBU consult with the workers? When there are any plant or equipment that's introduced into the workplace that may be new. The workers need to be consulted about this because their input could assist in resolving some of the risks associated with the introduction of the new plant and equipment. They may have knowledge with regard to the plant and equipment that they've obtained from previous workplaces, as an example. As a result, if they do have input, then of course they have ownership. Now, how do you consult as a PCBU? Well, there are 3 mechanisms under the legislation with regard to consultation. You could have, at the workplace, a health and safety representative, or what we refer to as a HSR. The PCBU could have a health and safety committee, and generally if you're a small business, you'll probably have in place what we refer to as other agreed arrangements. And this will generally be the case in small businesses where the workers don't want a health and safety representative, and of course there's not enough workers there to form a health and safety committee. Generally what would occur in this workplace is the PCBU would consult with the workers by having regular meetings. Other mechanisms for consultation under other agreed arrangements could be things like toolbox talks, where we sit down with the workers and we discuss the health and safety concerns and of course the hazards and risks associated with the activities at that place of work. The information shared between the workers and the PCBU means that the PCBU is proactively meeting with its consultation arrangements and of course is on the cutting edge with regard to managing its risks by including its workers in that process. One person alone may request a health and safety representative be appointed at that place of work. Then the PCBU must actively arrange the appointment of a HSR. This will involve identifying work groups associated with the place of work and, of course, calling for nominations of HSRs. If the PCBU cannot get any of the workers to become a HSR, they would probably default back to other agreed arrangements, which are as agreed upon between the PCBU and the workers. With regard to a health and safety representative's duties, the HSR would be responsible for representing those workers and any health and safety concerns that they had. The HSR would also be responsible for investigating health and safety concerns. So, if there was a matter at that place of work, the HSR would be quite within their rights to investigate that matter or that health and safety issue. It could be an accident or an incident at that place of work. Proactively, with the HSR being engaged in that process, then again it provides more ownership and the HSR can contribute in a timely manner. The HSR also can inspect the workplace, and what we would expect is that there would be some sort of structured checklist that the HSR would use in carrying out a workplace inspection. This will also help the PCBU to identify any hazards and possible risks that may be at that place of work. The difference between the HSR and what we formerly knew as an Occupational Health and Safety Representative, or OHSR under the existing legislation, is their tenure or their term. Their term is now for 3 years as opposed to 2 years under the former legislation. There are two key functions that have been introduced, and of course new powers that have been introduced under the legislation for HSRs. What this means is that the HSR can issue a provisional improvement notice, a PIN. This could be issued upon the PCBU if there was a breach under the work health safety legislation. We would expect that the HSR would firstly consult with the PCBU prior to writing out a provisional improvement notice. The PCBU may also contest the provisional improvement notice and may call upon an inspector from Workcover to resolve the matter. The HSR has an added power under the new legislation, and that is to direct unsafe work to cease. If this is the case, the workers must remain at the workplace and make themselves available for alternate duties. The HSR cannot issue a provisional improvement notice and cannot direct unsafe work to cease unless they have had the prescribed training. The course of training is over a 5-day period. This will equip the HSR with the necessary competence in which to undertake the duties of a HSR. Further to this, the HSR will undergo a 1-day refresher course for the duration of their tenure. The HSR does not have to participate in the training. They can still actively function as a HSR, but as mentioned earlier, they cannot issue a provisional improvement notice or a PIN and cannot direct unsafe work to cease. But it is up to the HSR to determine whether they wish to have the training or participate in the training. Once this is the case, the PCBU is responsible then for coordinating the arrangements so the HSR can attend the training. The PCBU, or if there's multiple PCBUs at that workplace, then those PCBUs would be responsible for the costs associated with the training and any time or wages associated with the HSR's attendance at that training. Another type of consultation arrangement is the use of a Health and Safety Committee. One must be appointed within 2 months of the request by a HSR or 5 or more workers at that place of work. Or, in essence, the PCBU can establish a Health and Safety Committee under their own initiative. At least half the members are workers. Now, as we know, all people at the workplace are workers, so how do we know half of them will be workers? Well, what that means is the workers are appointed by the workers at the workplace and the management workers are appointed by management at that place of work. So quite simply, if I'm the manager and I select one of my officers or managers to attend that committee, then they would be a management representative on that committee as an example. The Constitution is agreed by the PCBU and the workers at that place of work. The Health and Safety Representative, or HSR, can be a member of the committee only if they consent. so they don't necessarily have to be on the committee as such. And there is no fixed term for members. One of the important things to think about if I do have a health and safety committee is what would their duties be? Well, under the new legislation, their duties will be to assist the PCBU with regard to reviewing any policies and or procedures that exist in that workplace. So they do have positive and proactive input with regard to reviewing the policies and procedures at that place of work. When we look at consultation under the legislation, it probably wouldn't be unreasonable to suggest that that may result in some form of issue resolution, whereby the HSR may serve upon the PCBU a notice that the PCBU does not agree with. As a result, we would ask under the legislation that the parties try to resolve the matter internally following the dispute resolution procedure contained in the regulation. If there is a dispute resolution procedure that exists at that place of work, then that's fine. If not, we would ask that you refer to the regulation where there is a default dispute resolution procedure. If the parties still cannot agree with regard to the issue at hand or trying to resolve that issue, then the parties or either party can call in a Workcover inspector to assist with regard to resolving that matter. It may be such that the HSR had served a notice upon the PCBU. The Workcover inspector will review the notice and in essence will either support the notice as it is or may make amendments to the notice and or may ask the HSR to withdraw the notice as the inspector may believe that that is unreasonable. If the first two options are the case, such as the notice as is and or amendments to the notice, then it is given that the notice served upon the PCBU is now a notice served by the Workcover inspector. Therefore, it is taken out of the hands of the HSR and is now served by Workcover New South Wales. So, there's our consultation arrangements. We looked at when to consult, why do we consult, and the mechanisms for consultation. We looked at, and in particular small businesses, other agreed arrangements, and or the use of a health and safety representative or HSR. And also the case in larger businesses, we would look at a health and safety committee. Again, it's up to the PCBU to consult with all the workers at that workplace. So let's look now at risk management. Under the regulation, the Work Health Safety Regulation, it places a duty upon the PCBU. And the duty for the PCBU is to identify reasonably foreseeable hazards and to eliminate the risks, if not possible, then minimise the risks associated with those hazards. I think one of the things that we need to look at very carefully is what is the difference between a hazard and a risk. A hazard is anything that has the potential to cause harm, and a risk would be the likelihood and consequence of harm based on exposure to the hazard. So in essence, if I'm not exposed to a hazard, then there is no risk. When we look at reasonably practicable for the duty holder, what could be done to control the risk and what is reasonable to do to control the risk? And this is where we look at the likelihood, the consequence, what a person would reasonably know or ought to have known at the time, the availability and sustainability of measures in which to control the hazard, and the cost. For the first time, cost has been introduced. If the cost is grossly disproportionate to controlling the hazard, then that can be used as a defence. Let's look at the risk management principles. Firstly, the PCBU is required to identify the hazards that exist at the workplace. So anything that has the potential to cause harm. Historically, in the risk management process, the next step would be to assess the risk. This is not mandated under the new legislation, except for 4 particular activities. Those activities being confined spaces work, asbestos work, live electrical work, and diving work. The requirements are that a written risk assessment must be provided for those 4 activities. So in essence, the PCBU is required to identify the hazard and then move to elimination and or control. So is it possible to eliminate the hazard? And or could we control the hazard? And the final step in the risk management process is